Welcome to History Stories Dose, one story 10 parts, subscribe now.
In the early 16th century, the absolute limits of royal power collided with a single decree from Rome. A king demanded a favor from the Vatican, and the Pope issued a flat denial. At this time, the Vatican held ultimate authority over European monarchs. King Henry VIII needed a male heir to secure the Tudor dynasty, and his wife, Catherine of Aragon, had not provided one. Pope Clement VII could have granted an annulment, but he was physically trapped. Rome was under the shadow of Emperor Charles V, Catherine's powerful nephew, making a divorce a geopolitical impossibility for the Vatican. Henry realized that adhering to Rome's ruling guaranteed his family line would die with him. The traditional rules of diplomacy were going to cost him his kingdom. If the Pope would not grant the divorce, the king would have to remove the Pope's jurisdiction over England entirely. To protect his dynasty, Henry replaced centuries of religious law with royal decree. He launched a domestic revolution that redefined the limits of a king's authority, yet the cost of this victory would eventually eclipse the goal he was trying to achieve. Henry's offensive against Rome relied on legislation rather than military force. He waged his war in the halls of Parliament, fighting with statutes and legal precedents. The chief architect of this strategy was Thomas Cromwell, a brilliant and ruthless advisor who understood how to weaponize Parliament against the Church. Under Cromwell's direction, lawmakers passed a series of incremental, tactical bills. Step by step, they choked off the Catholic Church's revenue streams and severed its legal ties to the continent. This dismantled the traditional chain of command. The English Church disconnected from the Pope, slotting the king at the top. This maneuver transferred control of vast estates, the treasury, and the obedience of citizens directly to the crown. The campaign culminated in 1534 with the Act of Supremacy. The legislation finalized the Tudor schism. Through parliamentary process alone, Henry executed a legislative coup that seized total control of the church inside his borders. Outside the halls of government, these legal shifts collided with a millennium of tradition. Families across the country were suddenly ordered to discard their deepest convictions and swear spiritual allegiance to the king. Sir Thomas More, a respected scholar and former Lord Chancellor, challenged the reach of the new law. He refused to swear the oath, setting himself in direct opposition to the king's new title. Henry defined this defiance as treason. More was arrested and executed, establishing a precedent for the nation. Dissent against the king's church meant death. With the opposition silenced, Henry's newly captive church quickly invalidated his marriage to Catherine. After 20 years as queen, she was banished to live out the rest of her days in isolation. Henry purchased his new reality, but the transaction cost the lives of his closest friends, fractured the unity of his nation, and left England isolated on the world stage. With Rome out of the picture, Henry was finally free to marry the woman who had captivated him, Anne Boleyn. The massive disruption seemed immediately justified when Anne quickly announced she was pregnant. The kingdom held its breath. This impending birth was the validation Henry needed to prove that tearing the country's religious fabric apart had been worth it. Then, the child arrived. It was a healthy baby girl named Elizabeth. The male heir Henry had sacrificed his international standing for did not exist. Instead, the king was left with a sense of failure, and his patience with his new queen began to rapidly evaporate. Henry saw a disappointment that threatened his entire dynasty. Yet, historical hindsight tells a different story. In his relentless pursuit of a son to secure his legacy, King Henry VIII unintentionally cleared the throne for his unwanted daughter, paving the way for Queen Elizabeth I, one of the most formidable monarchs in history.